Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'll be talking about the 2019 mini-series version of The Name of the Rose with fellow medieval historian Kevin Lord.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good.
I am a medievalist, a historian of medieval Germany, and I just finished my dissertation in May of this year. So I'm currently thinking about my first book, which will be on a character who figures in the background of The Name of the Rose, Ludvig the Bavarian. So I'm very excited to talk about this miniseries.
Spoiler for the fact that that's going to be a figure discussed prominently in a later section of the podcast.
Right. If only to indulge my proclivities, right?
Yes. And we have known each other also for a long time since we were in graduate school together.
That's right. Many hair follicles have fallen from my hair, my head, since I met you.
We're both a little grayer and a little more depressed than when we first met.
Yeah, slightly. Yes.
Thanks, grad school.
Yeah, exactly.
The Name of the Rose miniseries is it actually a German company that produced it? I should have written that down.
I think it is.
Okay.
And I can't remember the name of the company, but I'm almost certain it's the same company to which we owe the existence of the Luck Dragon from the Never Ending Story. I think it's like Bavarian Filmworks. I'm pretty sure that it's them.
Okay.
If I'm wrong, then then excoriate me.
Someone might tell us.
But every film project should have a luck dragon associated with it. So
Definitely. Yeah. Starring John Turturro as William of Baskerville, who does a great job, and Rupert Everett as Bernard Gui. There are not a lot of people in this that I'd actually heard of before. The other one that I have is James Cosmo, who plays Jorge Burgos, who's has featured many times on this podcast because he's in Braveheart and Outlaw King, and he is in Game of Thrones.
Right.
As Jorah Mormont. Speaking of Game of Thrones, I want to extend just an apology to poor Damien Harding, who plays Adzo of Melk, because I definitely thought for the first 25 minutes of the first episode before I looked it up that he was Ramsay Bolton.
Seriously?
Yes.
He's so much less creepy looking than Ramsay Bolton.
I think he's creepy. I think he's just younger.
His creepiness has yet to come to full flower.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Damien, but you look a little like a young Ramsay Bolton. So maybe think about that when you're making your haircut choices, just in the future.
I don't know. I have to side with Damien Harding as a rather handsome young fella. Wholesome corn-fed German boy.
Jury's out on Damien.
Yeah.
I'll mention just also the names of the exactly two women actors in this, although I have not heard of either of them. Britta Scarano as playing the roles of both Margarita and Anna, because they couldn't hire two women.
That was a neat check, right? They couldn't find two.
Nope, God forbid. And Antonia Fotaras as, and this is how she is listed in the credits, the Occitan girl.
That's right, yeah.
So, spoiler alert, this might not pass the ifft test, my test in which I determine if there's at least one named woman who doesn't die.
Yeah, this movie, this series sets a very low bar, and it fails to meet it.
Yeah. And also, not in that respect, but in some other respects, as we'll see, it does worse than the movie and the book that this is based on.
Right, yes.
Yes.
I haven't seen Rupert Everett in anything else, but he has the extraordinary ability as Bernard Guy to look the entire time like there is dog shit on his shoe.
Oh yeah, he's good.
It's remarkable. It's it's not even just a wicked sneer. It's more of just I smell something awful.
Right, which is exactly what I would expect from Bernard Guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's really owning that character.
He's definitely owning the character.
Who played him in the movie? Do you remember?
I believe it was F. Murray Abraham.
Oh, that's interesting.
I used to get him confused with Ben Kingsley when I was a child, but...
I thought F. Murray Abraham was Jewish until 3 months ago. Apparently he is not.
I had no idea. Did you Google him?
I think he was in another movie that I can't remember what now, but he was in another movie that I did for the podcast, and I was looking him up, and then I'm like, oh, he's not Jewish? Huh. I've seen the movie, but not for years at this point. And I
Okay.
was going to try to watch it, but I couldn't find it streaming.
Well, it's actually a lot of fun. And, Sean Connery is,
He's
is
good.
still in his prime, his vigor.
Yeah, that's really the only thing I remember is Sean Connery.
Yeah, and if you like Christian Slater, he's in there.
Yes, I saw that
I
when I
think
was
Ron
looking.
Perlman's in there.
Yeah, that's right. I saw that goes Christian Slater as Adzo, right?
Yeah.
When I was looking up the cast of the movie a while ago, just out of curiosity, I was like, that seems so weird, just based on my current impressions of Christian Slater.
Yeah.
That I can't quite imagine him as a 14th century monk, but I'm sure he's
Well, he
good.
does
He's
a
very
good
talented.
job of primarily asking questions or being quiet, which,
Right. Right, which is kind of the point
it
of the
helps
character.
carry off, the medieval aspect of Christian Slater.
Right. And it must have been one of his first roles, so nobody yet had the preconceptions about Christian Slater as being an asshole.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Which is the character he usually plays.
And the film is, in my mind, it's kind of an excellent movie, but it's one of those movies that is so egregious in exaggerating medieval hysteria about the apocalypse.
Yeah.
So the monks are, they kind of go insane immediately once murders start, as I recall in the film. Or
Is that coming from the book, or did they exaggerate it in the film? I don't remember.
It was exaggerated in the film.
Okay.
Or at least that's my perception. My perception. I mean, I've read the book several times, but not recently.
Same, yeah, and just did not have time to reread the book on this particular occasion.
I had ambitions, but they were
yeah
largely unfulfilled.
Yeah, there's a lot happening.
That's right.
For the first main section, the enumeratio or recap section, I'll start with just a very brief recap, or as brief as I was able to get it for 8 hours of television, just to provide an orientation, and then we can have a more general discussion.
Excellent. It looks like it's more than 200 words.
Yeah, it would not go forth as a conference abstract. Maybe if it was a 250, it might be 250.
Excellent.
In the year 1327, the novice monk Adzo of Melk joins the Franciscan William of Baskerville on his travels to a Benedictine monastery, where he will represent the Franciscans in a theological debate about poverty with representatives of the Avignon papacy. However, before the papal representatives arrive, the abbey is disturbed by a series of mysterious deaths. The abbot tasks William with investigating the murders, which he soon links to the library. Meanwhile, Adzo meets and flirts with an Occitan woman who will remain nameless even after they eventually have sex. The arrival of the papal representatives, led by Dominican Bernard Gui, only complicates matters due to the debate, additional murders, and Gui's investigation into the heretical background of some of the monks. Eventually, the murderer is revealed to be the monk Jorge of Burgos, who has killed many of his fellow monks in order to contest efforts to open up the library, and in particular to keep a copy of Aristotle's Second Poetics, which speaks on the virtues of laughter, from the monks. Several of them died from touching the poisoned pages of the book. Jorge consumes the book and dies, while a lantern starts a fire that destroys the library and most of its contents. This is interesting to revisit after. I can't remember if you were at Yale when Umberto Eco spoke.
When he came and spoke, yes, I was.
Yeah, I couldn't remember when that was, but it was a great talk and very exciting to hear him speak. And he had the line that I wrote down, that I wrote down somewhere and have remembered, where he said, medievalists want to read the books, bibliophiles want to steal them.
Right.
Which feels very much like a assessment of the world, which is kind of at the root of this book in a lot of ways, the original book that this is based on in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Right. Well, didn't he tell us during that talk that he had conceived of writing a book about a library, not just from was it Borges, but also when he was in the stacks at Yale?
Yeah.
And I thought, what are the pressing? No wonder it's a pressing place to.
I know the stacks at Yale are not attractive enough to justify that.
The facade is stripped back once you get back there into the tower.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great talk.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. And he died just a couple of years ago, actually.
That's right. Yeah.
He, in general, I will say, really is somebody who clearly really deeply loved medieval history in a lot of ways, or was very or was like very deeply interested in medieval history and how he could use it to tell stories. And that did, I think, and that's really something that comes out in his books, and very much something that makes the book The Name of the Rose great, and I think is the root of what is best about the show as well.
Absolutely, I agree. His commitment to the subject material is apparent in the book itself. His other book, Bottolino, is also on a medieval subject, and it's a much more esoteric and, I thought, difficult story to get into.
Oh, I love Bottolino.
Really? Oh,
yes.
My goodness. I mean, what if, like the 300 pages of just weird medieval creatures? Like,
yeah, I love the weird medieval creatures.
Okay, so but I mean, it does definitely show like his commitment to like
oh yeah
actual research, right?
Yeah.
Which is then, of course, inevitably perhaps diminished when it is translated onto the screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the people who are responsible for this adaptation were as invested in medieval history as Umberto Eco was, and he presumed, based on the timing, he would not have been involved, I assume, at all in the production.
You know, why couldn't they get James Franco to consult on this?
I was going to say fellow Yale graduate, but I don't think he graduated, did he?
You know, it could take a while. I don't have no idea.
So yeah, fellow Yale grad student.
As a recent graduate, I can say it takes some time. I'm not casting stones.
Fair enough. We open with the line, "The future Holy Roman Emperor Ludvig of Bavaria declares the separation between politics and religion," which we can talk about in more detail in these specific sections where we talk about historical accuracy. But I definitely read that and just immediately went, well, this is going to be an experience.
I definitely began to question this entire project immediately when I read that line. Yep. I said, well, the commitment here is very light.
Yep. All right. This is where we're going with this.
The trick, yeah. Everyone should know now that turns out not to have been the case.
Yep. But we do have a battle at the beginning so that everyone knows that the Middle Ages was very violent.
It definitely does let us know straight up that this separation of politics and religion is going to be violent.
Like everything else in the Middle Ages.
This is not a joke, man. This is sword stuff. The rest of the series is a sideshow.
Yep. And it's very weird that it feels very gratuitous because this battle is not in the book.
No.
At least not anything that you see or, participate in. I don't think it's in the movie either.
No. I mean, it's not in the book. It's not in the movie. Adso of Melk is his. I don't believe that his father is described as a general in the Holy Roman Emperor's army.
Yeah.
And in fact, when Ludwig goes to Italy, he goes there, and they're Italian mercenaries that form the core of his force, because he originally rides down with 100 knights.
Yeah.
Right after Christmas time. Right. He's not heavily, he's not a rich guy either. So, the Italians are kind of footing the bill. So I don't know who this German general was with some kind of weird fetish.
Who also apparently drags his son out of the monastery and then makes him have sex with women in front of him or something.
Yeah, let me confirm that that you're doing it, boy. This isn't about my weird old man thing at all.
Yeah. That I'm gonna sleep with this woman and then be like, nope, your turn now, son.
Yes, right. Show me what you're capable of, boy.
Yeah, so that's a thing that his father, the general of the Holy Roman Emperor, does.
I could definitely see that as somebody turning into Ramsay Bolton after that upbringing.
Right. So that actually seems like a Roose Bolton move.
Yeah.
I guess based on all that, it really makes sense why William wants to take off with John Turturro, William of Baskerville, even with the example being given of him just buddying around with lepers, which, you have to be pretty holy to find that attractive.
Definitely, right? I mean, those weeping sores and misshapen craniums. I mean, yeah.
So, because of that he's a legit Franciscan, not one of those posers.
Right. It's holy, but pretty weird.
So he ends up going off with William and ditching his terrible father. And William is off to this abbey and is going to be the representative of the Holy Roman Emperor in some debate.
Well, hold on a second. We have to pass our own sad version of the Bechdel test.
Oh, yes, that's right. She appears before that.
to skirt around the unnamed actress.
Oh, yes, we do see
the strangely well-dressed young lady.
Right, that we just find this woman in the woods who is clearly kind of nervous around them, and then they like feed her, and then she sort of runs off, but also is sort of following them.
Right, yeah. It's such a significant point for the future plot.
Right.
And yet she never acquires more of a persona, unfortunately.
Well, except for the fact that eventually you find out she's been raped.
Well, that and she's a witch. I mean, come on.
Right. But she never has like a real personality or a name.
No.
And yes, and they run into the monks. William does this whole fancy thing, impressing them with his knowledge about the abbot's missing horse, and manages to deduce where it's gone and also its name. And I like that his entire deduction about the name is ultimately based completely on the assumption that they are so uncreative that they clearly named the horse Brunellus, which is basically the Latin equivalent of naming a brown horse Brownie.
Right. I actually love this sequence.
Yeah.
Both because it shows how uncreative the monks are in one sense, but it also reveals what the intellectual world might look like in a world where there's 100 texts circulating. Like,
yeah.
And like if that's the only literary description of horses, it's kind of a clever conceit, and I like the fact that they included it in the miniseries. And in the movie, they had assumed that the viewer was not perhaps intelligent enough or engaged enough to pay attention for the explanation, so they had kind of like a trite explanation of William guessing where the bathroom is.
Right.
Because a monk rushes in and then he comes out looking contented, and it's like, that's Sean Connery's Sherlock introduction to Sherlock Holmes.
That's very Sean Connery, to be honest.
Brilliant. So I love the fact that they actually tried to include something that involved like actual thought,
actual knowledge. And I will say John Turturro does really kind of pull that scene off, and in general I think he does a great job. He's definitely one of the kind of highlights.
I really enjoyed his performance. I wanted to continuously quote "Oh brother, where art thou" throughout the movie.
But
I never was a toad.
And I also kept honestly kind of forgetting that he was supposed to be English, but
well, right, and presumably they weren't speaking English, so hopefully.
I hope they weren't speaking English.
Hard to say.
They arrive, and it turns out that things are not all content and happy in the monastery, that there's instead one of the monks, Adelmo, has died in what is clearly probably a murder, maybe a suicide, definitely not an accident.
Right.
He then also kind of tasks William, in addition to his other things, with, you should help us, figure out this situation. I actually really like the abbot's move. William is like, so clearly I have to go to into the library because he died in the library. And then the abbot's like, clearly a man who could have figured out all of that about a horse he's never seen can solve this murder without ever going into the library.
Right. I thought that was very clever. And the guy who I don't remember the name of the guy who plays the abbot, but he does such a good job in this series.
He really does. He's fantastic.
Being slightly creepy without going over the top,
Yeah, he's a little eerie, and I was definitely trying to remember, does he have something to do with this? Because again, it's been a while since I've read the book or seen the movie.
Right.
So I remembered who the murderer is, but that was about it.
Exactly.
We meet Malachi, the librarian, an actor who I just immediately looked at, and I'm like, so this dude has played a Nazi, right? And yes, he has. Multiple times.
Well, typecast, of course.
You gotta feel bad sometimes for dour-looking German men that they really do just get cast repeatedly as Nazis.
I would feel worse for them if when I was in their presence, they didn't loom so tall over me and do things like buy me beer and talk to me, talk to me about, anything under the sun, but they are generally quite dour looking. I agree.
Right. Yeah.
But it turns out that they're mostly get a few liters of beer involved, and everyone's a teddy bear.
Right. So there's a lot of people who their pre-beer appearance is leading them to get typecast as Nazis. Poor guys.
I guess then they're just drunk Nazis, right?
Right. I mean, Hitler did a lot of his early meetings in some beer halls in Munich, right?
That's definitely true. Yes. I mean, it's always in the back of your mind, true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of the red alert for brown people and Jews.
Yep.
Keep your escape bag packed.
Yeah, it was definitely like a thought that I had on my one trip to Munich.
Yeah. Although I will tell you, I felt safer there than I ever have anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean,
And thank you, Ludvig of Bavaria.
Yes. Thanks for separating politics and religion all those years ago.
Exactly. And also, apparently the Augustiner brewery was founded during his reign. So I mean, come on.
Yeah, Ludwig.
He was a patron of good beer.
Yeah. We briefly see the Pope in this episode, who hears that William is going to be there and then decides to send his own fancy rep, Bernard Gui.
Or a gooey.
Yes. Is this when people started to say like gooey in this like really irritating way?
I love it. It's like it's so charming. Bernard Gui. It's such a like crazy exaggeration but I wonder, it was like, am I just saying it wrong?
I was wondering that too, but I don't think I am.
So my sense of it is that if he's from the south, from Limoges in the first place, that's a region that probably has a dialect, and I don't really know what his native pronunciation would have been.
It doesn't make sense to me in French, and it doesn't really make sense to me in Catalan either. And Occitan is close to Catalan, so
I've heard it referred to as his name as Bernard Guido before, like Guido,
right?
Just as
like
yeah, okay,
Bernard the Guido.
Yeah. Well, Bernard the convenient villain, I suppose.
Yes, and yes, we get the implication already that he is probably going to be a villain or one of our villains.
Yeah.
And we also, I guess, already by the end of the first episode have our first death. Venancio, who is the Greek monk in residence, we learn is not going to end well.
He's swimming with the fishes, but not like the fishes of hell or something.
The fishes, but not the good kind like you want.
Yeah. The ones who swim in blood. I don't know.
He's the one that they find him like upside down in the vat of
congealing pig's blood, right?
Yeah.
It's really disgusting.
I
say this as a proud consumer of pork products. I have nothing against. Well, blood sausage isn't a favorite of mine, but I'm not squeamish about raw meat. But that's just gross.
Yeah, I very similarly. I also am a big fan of pork products. Terrible Jew here. But yeah, that doesn't mean I want to be anywhere near just a vat of congealed pig's blood.
That was a real dick move, whoever put him in there.
Yeah, whoever. The abbot, meanwhile, is just like having a party, dropping jewels on the Virgin Mary statue.
Well, this is like my little sister and I playing with My Little Ponies when we were little, just like, I love that scene. But I didn't like the fact that they never had any engagement. It was all implied.
Yeah.
In a narrative that was more implicit generally, that might have worked better. But I actually thought they did try to explain a lot of other things, and they should have tried to explain that.
Right. And also I will say in general, so they made this into an 8-hour miniseries. They had previously successfully made it into a normal length movie. There was a decent amount of filler, including an entire plot line that they introduced that I'll talk about later that I was not happy with.
And they cut out a major character.
Right. Yeah. And so there were multiple just new plot lines that they introduced. They added a major character. I wish that they had done something to actually, address Marian devotion in a more meaningful way, other than just having the abbot dress up the Virgin Mary statue. But I did like that scene.
I thought that was an extraordinary visual piece of the scene where he's adorning the Virgin, and there's like the kind of visceral piety.
Yeah.
But if they had been able to connect that more explicitly, perhaps, to a scene later in the show where the abbot tries to get Adso to swear on this gem, and he goes on and on about gems, and it's like this idea of wealth in the Benedictine order, and what it represented, this idea of adornment and adorning the church with wealth and gems, and how important that is. I mean, they could have spent a little time on that, since you're right, they did. There's plenty of time for nonsense in this show, right?
Right. And the really fabulous line that he says to the Virgin, "You alone are worthy of all the beauties of this world."
Right.
And I just thought that was such a fantastic line, and I really would have liked to see more being done with that. No theology, but back to the murder.
Yeah, well, back to the juicy bits.
Yeah. William is talking with Severinus, who is the herbalist, I guess, of the monastery.
Oh, yeah.
And William kind of implies, so dissection would probably be the way to go. And Severinus initially just reacts with utter horror, like, "You are not suggesting that I open the body." And then William just goes basically like, "Well, can you, though?" And Severinus is just like, "Well, I went to medical school at Padua. Of course I can."
Well, whether or not it's a sin, my ego's involved now.
Exactly. The second he questions his abilities, essentially all of the like moral objections to dissection go immediately out the window.
Right.
They dissect him and figure out that he was probably poisoned, at least part of which they did not even have to do by dissecting because they find his blackened fingers and tongue. But I guess they also find something in his innards.
It was like, yeah, scorched or something.
Right. And go through Severinus's cabinets and find that one bottle has been emptied. The label is in Chinese, which William easily reads, and I am calling bullshit on anyone in this monastery reading Chinese.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I'm calling bullshit on the poison being like ascribed to like the mysterious East in any
that
sense.
Too.
It's like, come on, man. But that poison didn't need to come from China to be exotic. It's like it could have been too much lobelia or something. But I guess it had to be the power of 1,000 scorpions. But
right, exactly.
The Chinese label to me felt like, well, why are they getting thrown under the bus for this?
Right, it's like some weird kind of Orientalist bullshit that, like, of course the poison that's like the poison to end all poisons, like that's of course it has to come from the mysterious East.
Yeah, it's like this is some creepy Italian stuff.
Right.
It's like they've been making this poison on top of this mountain for 1,000 years, man. It's the only place you can get it.
Stop throwing Italian poisons under the bus. Italian poisons are just as good as the foreign stuff.
My uncle and his wife went to Italy a long time ago, and they said they went up to this one monastery and they were expecting to get wine. They got there and they were selling beauty products. So why not one with poison?
Exactly.
I mean, it's a growth market, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Monks can do whatever they put their mind to.
Yeah, come on.
Adso also at some point is just, Jorge is trying so hard. The like elderly blind monk Jorge is just like aggressively trying to talk to him, and Adso is working so hard to not talk to him, which you cannot blame him because even though, spoiler alert, we do not know yet that Jorge is the murderer, he is like kind of an asshole.
He's definitely a giant dickhead, and any conversation he enters immediately sucks.
Yeah.
He's one of those people who ruins a party immediately upon entering. as you see at various points indeed in the show.
Oh, yeah.
In the first movie, they had the character of Ubertino da Casale, who was a real life figure.
Right.
And he was played so over the top and campily and in such a creepily kind of pederastic fashion.
Right.
But in some sense, actually in a truer form to the book.
Yeah.
Whereas just simply eliminating his character and having Jorge follow Adso around trying to talk to him all the time
right.
is completely ridiculous. Because the point of the Ubertino character in the book, at least in terms of Adso, is that he kind of has this creepy discourse with Adso about like the Blessed Virgin versus like the whore of Babylon and what's the difference between the two.
Right.
But his problem is that everything he says is like arousing Adso.
Right.
The implication is that Ubertino is a little overheated himself. And,
right. Yeah, whereas Jorge is just like dour as fuck.
Exactly. And the idea that he'd be interested in talking with a novice is suspect.
Right. It's like, what's your deal? We see briefly the Occitan girl again in this episode.
That's right.
So that we can find the only other thing that we know about her, which is that we get to have a flashback of how her family was murdered and she got raped.
It's par for the course. I mean, of course.
You don't need a name to be raped.
To me, it's extraordinary that she manages to teach Adso the word for house in Occitan, or home, right? But not her name.
Right. And also, I'm pretty sure he says his name at some point.
I do think that's correct, yes.
And she never says hers.
Well, he never asks.
Of course he doesn't. Why would he?
It's like, well, this whole lack of conversation thing turns out to be very convenient for me.
Doesn't it?
I'll just read a couple of things I find in the library about love and project my emotions onto this refugee.
This poor traumatized woman.
I did want to mention the scene where the librarian Malachi comes into the infirmary or the herbarium or wherever and is yelling at Severinus in German. Right?
Yeah.
They have a German conversation about William. And I love the fact that even 1,000 years ago, the implication is that nobody could understand German, and that it's just an amazing thing when it's like, you understand German? Wow. I'm sorry, I wouldn't have been talking about you right in front of you if I'd known.
Right. That's a timeless experience, talking about somebody assuming they don't speak your language and then realizing that you've insulted them or that they know they've been insulted.
It's happened to me so many times. It's fair enough because German is a tongue twister.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, my spoken German is non-existent, so Or my spoken
Yeah.
German is limited to like ordering beer successfully, I guess I would say.
Well, because they don't have any R rolling in the German language, really, at least not, that I've ever encountered. It's a language that I can actually speak. For Spanish with its R's, it's very, very difficult for me.
Maybe that's my issue with German. Maybe I keep wanting to roll my R's and I'm not supposed
Yeah.
to. We also meet Remigio the Celerer and find out
Oh,
lots
yeah.
about his past because he has a fun flashback of hanging out with the heretic Delcino and his lover slash co-preacher Margarita. And apparently he's got a thing for Margarita and then also kind of makes the promise to protect Delcino and Margarita's daughter Anna.
Right.
We also learn that both of them were killed by Bernard Gui, who goes with the line, "Kill them all, God will recognize his own,"
Right.
which I guess we've just stolen from the Albigensian Crusade a century or so before.
A little plagiarism. It makes sense in the medieval context. It's like, well,
yeah.
I heard this great line somewhere. I've been waiting to use this forever.
I know, right? Somebody else said this when talking about heresy. I can use that line too now.
Yeah. They used this line when they burned my ancestors. I mean, I recognize that Limoges is not right in the path of the Albigensian Crusade,
right.
but still, it's close.
But still, yeah, close.
Oh, Benno.
Yeah, Benno.
Blondie. Oh my gosh.
He is so blonde.
Yeah, it's like the Draco Malfoy of the series.
I know, right? We meet him. He gets very chatty and starts whispering about, quote, sodomites.
Yes, as one does.
Uh-huh.
What do you do on a Saturday evening? I mean, it's like,
right?
It's sodomite city around here. Come on.
Right. And in particular, that Malachi and Berengar seem to have something of a reputation for their involvement with one another and also with basically using books to seduce other men in the abbey.
Yeah.
And that Adelmo in particular was seduced by Berengar in this manner. Adzo's like shock, like sodomy in a monastery? My friend, where else do you think there's sodomy?
Right. Exactly. Unless it's in your dad's camp. Who knows?
Like, monasteries are probably like the center of medieval gay culture, let's be honest.
Well, exactly. Totally. And you have to think that at some point, by that point, he's encountered the rule of Benedict where they talk about having the lights on for the novices and the novices don't go to the bathroom by themselves. And it's like, what do you think these rules are about, young man?
Right.
Making sure that the scary monsters don't get you. Well, yeah.
Right.
Well, yes. But, what kind?
We also have our first efforts at this point to sneak into the creepy library and find, I guess, the book that Venancio was looking at, which is the book that they knew that Anselmo at some point also had been looking at.
Right.
But the book is taken, and William also loses his glasses, which he is very sad about.
Yes, a major plot point.
Yes. As I was like trying to act super tough, and he's like, "I'm warning you, I was a soldier in the Imperial Army," and it's like, no one is buying this.
I know. It's like, no, you weren't, dude.
I mean, technically he was, but like, not really.
I don't know. It's like, does being a camp follower count?
Tagging along with your dad, who is a commander in the army, is not quite the same. His dad seemed to expect that he was going to be killing people, but he didn't seem to be doing a very good job of it in the battle scene. The only thing we saw of him in the battle scene is basically just that, like, he's kind of trying to give the last rites to people that he finds half dead.
I mean, I guess being a chaplain counts as being in the armed forces, so, I mean, fair enough. I withdraw my objection. Soldier feels a little strong to me still, but...
Yeah, it's like, and he's using it as a threat. Look at me, I'm dangerous. And it's like, buddy, no, you're not.
You probably shouldn't shriek it in a quailing voice.
Right, yeah, it doesn't help. I also enjoy that they decided to stick in, I don't remember this, but maybe this was in the book or the movie, that William goes like, "By the beard of Merlin," as his oath. And Asda's like, who?
Right.
It's like a magician from my country. It's like, all right. I guess we just like need to like stick in an Arthurian reference so the people who know nothing else about the Middle Ages will recognize something.
That is a crowd pleaser.
Yep.
I had to applaud.
We also get to hang out a bit with Alinardo, who is the elderly, slightly maybe not in his best stages of life's monk, who starts talking about the Book of Revelation. And I also love how Adzo acts like it's this like weird, shocking, intriguing coincidence that there are verses from the Book of Revelation in the library, and now Alinardo is quoting it. It's the 14th century. Everybody's quoting the Book of Revelation all the time. It's not special.
Exactly. Like Northern Italy is consumed by war. They're 10 years away from the Great Famine.
Yeah, like this is not as much of a clue, or shouldn't be as much of a clue, at least, as he thinks it is.
But it is rather shocking if you're a dunderhead.
Right. Which Adzo kind of is.
Yeah.
Adzo also finds the room in the library which has creepy drug smoke and hallucinates an iguana and also his father yelling at him for being responsible for killing his mother who died in childbirth.
Yeah, I mean, generally the babies are always They're
Yep.
always responsible for that,
Damn babies. And also, I do
know.
like that we can add another nameless dead woman to the cast.
Come on, if this show is good for one thing, it's almost representing women in a way that's almost, as offensive as other movies.
Yep.
Instead, it's like, well, instead of being offensive, let's just not have them.
Yep, that's better.
I mean, it does sound like a very monastic approach.
Oh, yes.
To be fair.
True. William rescues Adzo, who is like kind of high for a while, and him like being like high at mass is actually kind of entertaining.
Yeah, it was actually pretty good. Those guys are creepy enough when you're not high. Right?
This is not a good trip.
Like, Benno, stop staring at me, bro.
You gotta stop, man. You're too blonde. It's getting weird. Adzo also starts becoming curious about heresy after his hearing some stuff from Remigio and Remigio's companion Salvatore, who is the other person who's maybe somewhat kind of mentally disabled.
Which, we should definitely talk about Salvatore.
We should. I have a lot of feelings about what ends up happening with that character.
But I do want to say before, the fact that this show so baldly links Adzo's interest in heresy with like a 10-second conversation with Remigio, it's like as if the show agrees with Bernard Guy.
Right. That like if you hear about heresy, then you are immediately going to want to start doing research and like become a heretic.
5 seconds in the company of a heretic, and you are like deep. You're balls
like,
deep.
Let me read about the heresy.
Oh my gosh! I mean, I think it was a little subtler in the book. Maybe.
Right. He also gets like a 15 fucking minute lecture from Malachi before he's allowed to read a book about how heresy is bad.
It's almost as if Malachi had been a parent in a past life. It's like, well,
right.
As the parent of a 14-year-old, I have to like also like offer like I can't cast any stones here. I'm like, well, son, I think that you should do this, that, and the other thing, but at the end, he wore me down.
Speaking of people who are doing like awkward parental talks, Jorge talking to Adzo about sex is like the most unpleasant thing I've heard in my entire life. Like, you should be hired out to give like sex talks to teens at high school.
Right. I don't know. I mean, my concern about that is that Jorge would probably poison the entire school,
True. One kid would laugh and then he's just like, well, we're done here.
It's like, everybody read this book. I've got something for you.
Jorge's sex talk, however, is unsuccessful, and Adzo goes off to flirt in the woods.
Like, obviously, talking about sex seems to, as they would say, inflame his pudenda, so.
Yes. She's like sort of trying to teach him Occitan, but does not introduce herself. That's fine. But she does teach him how to imitate a bird, so I guess that's important.
I wonder if I'm the only person who wanted to learn how to make that bird call. But I failed to do it.
I kind of do. It was cool, but with the exception of the fact that it did just annoy me that I'm like, did they have that in place of having him know her name? Because otherwise he could call her name when he entered the woods, and now it's fine, right? That he doesn't have to because he can like make a fucking bird call instead.
To be fair, I realized that the girl did not have a name in the book.
Yes, that one's on Umberto Eco, unfortunately.
But they changed other parts of this series. Why not give her a name, right? What would it have been so hard?
I mean, they add in this like lengthy backstory about her family being murdered and her getting almost raped, which is also not in the book, so they could give her a name.
I actually didn't like the fact that she was a refugee from not from Italy, because it didn't make sense to me why she was there.
Yeah, I was going to talk about this word later. It seems really weird to me. Like, how did she like get that far?
Why did you go there?
Yeah, no, it just seems so odd that she like wandered all the way to Italy.
Although it was super cool that she was speaking Occitan. That was like, yes, I think perhaps the first time I've ever heard someone speak Occitan on a televised broadcast.
Yeah. So that was
that I'm
cool.
aware of, at least. Yeah.
He tries to kiss her, but gets rejected and still does not know her name.
And his skills as a soldier are definitely revealed to be
minor.
Quivering in fear.
Oh, yeah. I'm a soldier in the Imperial Army.
She's a badass.
She could have been a cool character. I'm not sure it quite gets that far, but I think she was the kernel of maybe an interesting character.
Yes.
That did not quite pan out.
It's almost as if they could have combined the other half-hearted female character that they made up.
Yep.
Into her character.
Yep. Speaking of female characters who are just done a disservice to over the course of this show, we get to just gratuitously watching a flashback of Bernard Guy torturing Margarita.
Yes.
Which is in this for no reason, including this gross that he promises to, quote, butcher that wonderful body of yours. I really hate, not that there weren't assorted monks who I'm sure were turned on by women and might have done inappropriate things as a result. But I find the insistence essentially that all of them do to be very frustrating. And in particular, Bernard Gui, I'm sorry, I think he's just like a dour asshole.
I probably should have mentioned in my intro that I've written an article about Bernard Gui, and the article that I wrote about him, which is forthcoming at some point in the future, but it's about Saint's life, about this guy that he compares to a crocodile, which Sarah, you read before.
Yeah, that's right. I have read that.
Yeah. But you don't get the sense that Bernard is a vicious man. It's more that he's not particularly creative.
Yeah.
The thing that is really frightening is his Inquisitor manual.
Oh, yeah.
His manual for Inquisitors is very frightening, and I guess it depends on if you read if you read the lines with like an evil sneer on your face. I guess that you could read that in a number of ways, right? You could also read that as a bureaucrat who's simply trying to communicate what he believes to be the strategy of rooting out heresy.
One of the things that I actually find so horrifying about his Inquisitor's manual is that it reads to me as being very kind of cold and clinical.
Right.
And I think in some ways that just very cold bureaucratic approach is almost more terrifying than him being this kind of, I don't know, creature of like passion and sexual frustration, and that being at the kind of root of his hatred of heretics and women and whoever else.
I think that the fixity of his worldview is frightening enough.
Exactly.
At least for me.
I think there's so much that you can do with Bernard Gui and him as being this genuinely frightening character without making him sadistic and creepy in this particular way.
Well, I mean, if there are any Hollywood producers out there, I'd love to write a bumbling detective series about Bernard Gui. Kind of like Brother Cadfael meets Blackadder or something.
Right.
I mean, I don't have any reason to believe that he was necessarily catching any heretics or anything, but I mean, he was actually quite a skilled author of saints' lives, I guess, if that's a skill. He could sit around and dictate, or I don't know if he wrote them himself, but I imagine he dictated them to a scribe.
Yeah.
So he was good at dictating things to other people.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes work.
Yep. We have Margarita, who has been, being tortured, and, we obviously know she doesn't make it. We do, however, have one named female character who, as of episode 3, is still alive. And this is Margarita's daughter, Anna, who is now about the same age as the nameless Occitan girl, I would say.
Right.
Who knows that Bernard Gui killed her parents and wants to kill him. I don't know why this random peasant heretic is really good at military stuff.
Well, yeah, that was not clear.
It isn't, no.
I do think it's a big deal that they introduced a woman with a name in this book, because they are in the series, sorry. That matters, but she's strange and not fleshed out enough, I think, to actually really warrant her presence in the story. I think, though, one of the things that it happens so quickly that I've watched this series twice now, but the first time I missed this as well. Actually, her family is killed by Bernard Gui's heretic or little army when they're on the way to the monastery. Okay. So while they're on the way to the monastery, I think that they decide just to stop through the town. Do you remember when he drags the two naked people out of the tent? And of course, the naked woman is the witch, and so
right,
et cetera, et cetera. But I can't remember the name of the town that she said she was from. But remember, he was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that place,"
Right, that's the heretic
And then the
town.
next thing we see is them burning that town up, and then she shows up again, and her family's dead or something. So I think that was the initial impetus to chase them, but she turns out to be the daughter, and I think she was hiding in the woods or something and saw them burn her parents.
Yeah.
I mean, nevertheless, we never do learn why she's Robin Hood.
Right, exactly. And it's just such a weird turn to take, and very much also kind of goes into this thing that I have, that female characters can't be presented as having agency unless they're presented as having agency in these very anachronistic, but also in some ways stereotypically masculine ways.
Right.
That she can only have agency if she's this woman warrior figure.
Yeah.
And I find that very irritating.
Well, and for me, it just didn't work with the tone of the story.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like they can change if they wanted to, they obviously can change the tone of the story.
Right.
To me, what made the story actually interesting was not the violence and gratuitous torture.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
One of the things about the book is that despite obviously there's violence and that there are a number of murders committed, the book is really not an action book for the most part in that way.
At all.
And then the movie isn't either. And the show, I feel like, is really kind of trying to make it an action show.
Yeah.
And the way they do it and the way they try to weave that in just almost never works.
It's like you could always see where it had been forced into the script by fiat.
The seams of what they're interpolating into the original narrative are just very obvious, and it's not well done.
Right.
I understand that there had to have been filler. It was very much, I think, a choice that the filler had to be like action-y filler, because that's what people expect of the Middle Ages, is more violence.
Yeah.
But I wish that that was not what they had done. I would have rather had more theology.
I mean, I would have rather had theology, and to be fair, I would have even preferred if they had spent the very beginning of the show, just have maybe another 30 seconds of the battle scene, but have a narrative overlaying what was at stake there.
Right.
And maybe understanding, because they kind of do a half-assed job of talking about the Italian communes and their role, which is an important aspect of the story. It's like, the monastery, or many of the monks in the monastery, feel threatened by the rise of the communes as a center of economic force, and things that nerds care about. But
right,
I don't know. I really do. I do love the story.
This is definitely one of my favorite books for a long time.
Yeah.
Bernard Guia finally shows up at the monastery, and we've got some tensions between him and William over the question of heretic burning, including this weird conversation where Gui's like, "Oh, I mean, you've burned heretics before," and then William's like, "No, I haven't," because apparently he managed to, I don't know, never actually condemn somebody as an inquisitor. And then Gui goes, "It was just a figure of speech." I'm like, it's not, though, because that's actually a thing that you do in terms of condemning people to be burned, at least.
Well, right. I mean, but if you're only condemning them, if you're remitting them to the secular arm, I mean, come on.
We will see there is a difference between the two, but still, calling it a figure of speech,
right?
It's not, though. William and Remigio chat after William catches Remigio sneaking out with some wine and a lady. He's like, "I don't want you to think I spend my nights drinking and fornicating." It's like, but you do, though, I guess. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah,
but
it's like, I mean...
do your thing.
I guess you want a different reputation than the one you deserve.
Right, I mean, fair, but...
a heretic who fornicates with women, I mean, whatever,
Yeah, and it's fine. I don't mind, but I'd rather hang out with him than Bernard Gui, but...
Exactly. Sounds like a better company than the abbot.
Oh, yeah. Michio might be pretty high on the list of people in this monastery that I'd get a drink with.
I wonder about Severinus. I bet he has some good things in the infirmary.
Oh, yeah. He's pretty chill. He went pretty fast to the, I'll dissect this dude.
Yeah, I mean, he's like, well, I'll put up a token of resistance.
Right, exactly. He just wants to be able to say that, no, William made me.
Plus, I mean, most of the other monks are just, outright scary.
Right. And then, speaking of other monks, Berengar, I don't think I would have wanted to have a drink with him, but now I'll never have the opportunity because he's now dead, and is found naked in one of the baths. And I was very entertained by the fact that there's a very artfully placed reflection of a window, which is clearly just there so that we can't see his dick.
Are you sure his dick just wasn't shining with holy light? I guess I need to rewatch that scene now.
They said that Adelmo was seduced by the book, but maybe it was just Berengar's glowing dick.
In Bernard Guy's apocryphal life of Berengar, it's a clear sign of his sanctity. His dick was lit up like a Christmas tree.
The halo was just a little lower than it sometimes is. I want to see that iconography.
Yeah.
They also then start to reflect on whether the deaths are inspired by the 7 trumpets of the apocalypse, which would make this the original version of the movie Seven, basically.
That's right.
At the top of our next episode, they find William's lenses hidden inside Berengar's habit, so that's one mystery solved of who that was in the library that night, but then also find that Berengar's finger and tongues, like Vedancio's, are black.
Right.
The papal delegation arrives and start talking about how, we can't start the debate until Bernard Gui shows up and has his fancy armed escort. William is not thrilled about any of this. We also learn more about Salvatore's past.
Right.
Salvatore, we don't know that much about his childhood quite or anything like that. But at least by the time he was, I think based on what the timing's supposed to be, at least by the time he was kind of a young man,
Yeah.
We see that he's being tortured and treated as a literal dog by some obnoxious Italian noblemen. He clearly is, I would say, I mean, the way that, he talks in his odd, he kind of goes back and forth between multiple languages and clearly is not exactly fluent in anything and clearly is presented, I would say, as being kind of mentally disabled in some way.
Right.
And then also has this kind of past of being abused, and Remigio saved him and saved his life, and that's why he's so loyal to Remigio.
Yeah.
I think that there are probably things that could be said about his character even as it originally appears in the book, but there are choices that we will increasingly get to, I think some starting in this episode, about what they do with Salvatore's character that I think are really questionable in terms of being depictions of one of the very few characters with a disability.
I think in the book, Salvatore occupies this more ambiguous position as one of the victims of kind of the endemic wars in northern Italy in the late 13th, early 14th centuries. And he's supposed to be one of these displaced people who had been everywhere and nowhere. And his only education was the road. And he'd been a rascal and a friar and a warrior and all. He was supposed to, in the book, he's presented as kind of having been everything and nothing in this weird way.
Yeah.
He was the representative of the simple, I guess, in the monastery.
Surrounded by all of these learned men, right?
Right. And I do think the depiction of him in the TV series, it introduces a dimension that is more problematic even. And you might be right. I'd have to reread the book and see if the kernel of the problem is actually in the story's depiction of him.
The language thing, at least, is definitely in the book. And that, to me, hints at there being some kind of developmental disability. I mean, because even if you're not educated and even if you move around a lot, I don't think that people learn.
To me, it's that's a magical ability.
It's just so odd,
Yeah, I couldn't quite reconcile that with anything other than the whimsy of Eco's.
And maybe that's a problem, is that it's just kind of a whimsical creation of a figure who probably actually couldn't exist at all in some ways.
Right.
And is kind of a symbol, but that in doing so kind of accidentally even kind of created this disabled character, but not necessarily in a great way.
Right.
And it gets worse in the show in that, and this is something we already see in this episode, that he builds a rape trap for the nameless Occitan woman who he sees in the woods at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's explicitly a rape trap. It's
It
terrible.
is a trap to catch her so that he can then rape her.
Yeah.
Adzo rescues her, and then they start to make out, but then she tries to kill him because of her rape trauma from the previous time that she got raped. Because, of course, that's a plot line, because God forbid you have a woman who hasn't been raped in a medieval piece of media.
Right.
Then Salvatore has this original incel bullshit where he's all she loves Adzo and not me because, you are beautiful and I am not. And it's okay,
neoliberalism sucks and the sexual revolution.
But yeah, and so it's this very uncomfortable thing that they do with him. There's also some more fun stuff in the library. They get to have some nice shout outs of cool works from antiquity and the Middle Ages.
Right.
Got Isidore of Seville. They've got Avicenna. They got some good stuff. Adzo, of course, finds some quote about love somewhere because Adzo thinks everything is about his dick now.
Yeah, well, it's almost like he's a teenage boy.
I know, but it's buddy, you're solving a murder.
But the riddle of his dick.
That's the most important riddle of all.
Every teenage boy tries to solve it again and again.
There's also a creepy staircase that screams, so that's fun.
Yeah.
And we also get to see Malachi mourning over the body of Berengar and this deeply evocative language, including quoting the Song of Songs in a way that he's actually placing himself in the position of the female beloved and referring it to Berengar as in the terms of the male beloved.
Right.
That was a really interesting scene. I actually like that they included that.
I thought that was pretty cool, but come on, don't you think that Malachi could have had better game in the monastery? if that's the deal that you make to get your assistant librarian. Berengar, I'm sure he cleans up well, but we haven't seen it in the show. We need to send him to Ibiza for a few weeks and get some sunlight on that kid and then come back and let's see if he's worth the Song of Songs. I'm just saying, jury is out here. Even creepy Malfoy is a better candidate than him.
He's not that much better though. This is not a group of monks this is not a sexy group of monks on the whole.
They're not as scary as the ones from the movie.
Fair. But like Berengar is not how I would imagine the male beloved in the Song of Songs, but I mean everyone else at this time is imagining the male beloved in the Song of Songs just Jesus, so.
Right. Right.
I did think that was actually a kind of nice scene.
It was a touching scene. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was a touching scene. There's a lot in terms of how gay relationships are depicted throughout, which mostly kind of emphasizes it as being kind of unsavory and predatory.
Which I wasn't as clear about whether, like, how that would have actually been experienced in the monastery.
Right, exactly. Because not to say that there couldn't have been unsavory or predatory relationships, but it doesn't sit with me well the idea that they all were necessarily unsavory and predatory.
It's not clear to me that everybody understood them that way necessarily.
Exactly. I think the fact that they very much kind of emphasized that at least Malachi had really genuine feeling for Berengar, I mean, that he was in love with him and that he has this kind of very touching scene of mourning for him, I think is actually a nice inclusion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We have some more of Anna, who basically had been like injured in her attempt to kill Bernard Gui and then just like drags her bleeding ass around until she eventually collapses. What an exciting plot line this female character has.
The one time you need your arrow to hit its target.
Right? And it's like implied that she's good at her shit, but she can't hit Bernard Gui. He's like an easy target comparatively.
It's like he's tall. Come on, there's a lot of frame there.
He's tall. He's not moving as fast as your average deer.
Right. He's over there kneeling on rocks and shit. He can't move.
Yeah. I feel like she should have gotten him. Of course she doesn't, because you can't kill Bernard Gui halfway through the show.
Even as a historian, at that point, I was like, just kill that guy. I don't care. You know?
Right? Yeah. It's like, ugh, whatever.
We could just skip to a happy ending.
I know. Like, can we at least give her character a point? Like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just funny that, well, not funny, but I mean, it's like, well, tellingly, the one named female character shows up, screws up very quickly, then gets shot with an arrow.
But then does meet at the top of the next episode the one other female character.
Yeah.
And at first I had this moment, I'm like, could this pass the Bechdel test? And then I'm like, nope, it never can, because one of them has no name.
Yeah.
There are bits that would pass if she had a name, but she doesn't.
It is impressive that she somehow managed to avoid describing her lover while she was talking about herbs. I mean, something that very few women in Hollywood can do.
I know, right? It's so hard not to talk about men.
I mean, you know. Speaking of men, no.
Speaking of men, because this show has mostly men.
I know, it's like, well, who else could we possibly speak about next?
Exactly. Even if I have a woman guest, this podcast never passes the Bechdel test.
Right.
Because all the movies are about men.
Right.
Gui arrives, and the arguments start over dinner about, he gives some like fancy gifts to the abbot, and there's like a fancy crucifix. The Franciscans start to like make fun of the fancy crucifix.
Yeah, Jesus has a coin purse.
Right, yes. Which is great. This is what I want more of.
Oh, man, right?
I want more of the Franciscans fucking, like, making fun of the Benedictines.
Right? I want more controversy about Bling Jesus.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I want commentary on Bling Jesus. What I don't necessarily want more of are, like, Franciscans taking their shoes off at the dinner table, because I don't care if you're making a point. That's still kind of gross.
I wanted to know who his sandal maker was.
Right? Good shape.
I figure that nobody at that table has ever washed their hands, so, you know.
Oh, no. Apparently
I mean,
not.
it's a show about the Middle Ages, so, you know.
Right, so of course everyone has to be very dirty. Despite the fact that we see baths multiple times, still everyone has to be very dirty.
Right.
Although in defense of the Franciscans, I think they like just got there, so maybe they didn't have time to take a bath.
Right.
Malachi decides to throw in his lot with Gui and inform him of various things, including that he has Remigio's secret letters. We get a weird fucking scene of Bernard cutting some little crosses into his skin.
Right. Let's just include a cutting scene.
Yep, which is a choice. William then also informs the Franciscans about Remigio and Salvatore's past as heretics, which the Franciscans are very nervous about because the Daltonians and the Franciscans are sometimes linked. This is the point in which the Franciscans are being accused of heresy, and in particular kind of linked with heresies that emphasize poverty.
Right.
So they're very nervous about this. This is also the episode that has the scene that I was so disappointed by, so that they have the like debate about laughter, about whether Christ laughed.
The greatest of all debates.
Yes, and I actually remember, like, I loved this scene in the book. I loved this scene in the movie.
Exactly.
And I felt like they really cut it short. So he's having this debate with Jorge and William. William makes this great point about how St. Lawrence made a joke. I love this. Like, this is like my favorite, like one of my like top 10 favorite saint facts is that St. Lawrence said while he was like on a grill, he said, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." I love you, St. Lawrence.
Right.
I believe he actually is the patron saint of comedians, according to the Catholic Church today.
Oh, really? Fantastic.
Which I love. But we have to follow Adzo, who leaves to go awkwardly flirt in the middle of the debate. And I'm like, I don't want to watch like Adzo have sex. I want to watch this debate.
Yeah, he was just very disappointing in that scene.
Yeah, like I'm disappointed in Adzo for leaving, and I'm disappointed in the show creators for making us leave with Adzo to watch Adzo bone instead of listening to the rest of the debate.
Yeah, I mean, on paper it sounds very win, but but yeah,
but it's not.
It's like, you guys, if listening out there, if you haven't heard people debate about whether Christ laughed, you haven't lived.
It's great. It's so interesting.
It actually is.
It really is. And and they really cut it short, and I'm so sad about it.
I totally agree with you. And so in the movie and in the book, it comes much earlier. And the emphasis on the importance of whether Christ laughed or not as part of what's happening in the Abbey is introduced much earlier. Whereas here, it's not necessarily even clear that it's important.
Right. It seems like this odd throwaway scene.
Something to start happening as Adso sneaks out to go.
Exactly. And as we'll see, it ultimately becomes central, actually, to what's going on in the Abbey.
Exactly. Right. It's at the heart of the problem. Right. And so I didn't understand why they didn't include that debate, this conversation in the place where they did in the book and the movie, which is when William and Adso first go into the scriptorium.
Right. Exactly.
Because then it kind of introduces that these guys think about this stuff, and that for them it's not an esoteric question, it's part of their world that's really important.
Yeah, and the way that it's introduced, I think, really does make it ultimately seem like it's this kind of meaningless esoteric question. To modern people, I guess it is. As a medievalist, I understand that it isn't, and I think it's fascinating. That's the great thing about the book, is that Umberto Eco realized that this was important, and that ultimately that it makes sense that he made the mystery hinge on this, and it's just a really disappointing choice that also, I think, makes the conclusion make less sense if you're watching this without having seen the movie or read the book.
Yeah, I agree completely, because this is just such an aside in the narrative. And I think it is such an esoteric and for modern people largely irrelevant question. But if we want to understand the Middle Ages, of course, we have to understand that for these people who were part of the intellectual intelligentsia of their era, this was a central question about how they approached and thought about the world. And it can actually teach us a lot about what they were doing, what they thought they were doing, and why, right? And so from that perspective, it was a missed opportunity, right? And then,
Exactly. I think its narrative force is also diminished by the fact that then we have another debate, which, while I think also interesting and important in terms of how we understand the Middle Ages, is not central to what is ultimately the kind what it's like. It's not central to the murder plot, obviously, and that debate is given much more importance. It's very kind of emphasized as this is the kind of beginnings of the conversations between the papal representatives and the Franciscans. So it's this debate about essentially whether Christ owned earthly goods, and then devolves into an actual brawl.
That was actually a very fun scene.
Oh, yeah.
I think in the book, the character who starts basically shouting at the cardinal that he's, just like a piece of shit is the Bishop of Caffer or something.
Yeah.
I believe there is a medieval manuscript that purports the Bishop of Caffer to have been, pretty much an asshole, kind of on the Franciscan side, inflammatory, and not very committed to the facts. But that the thing that was fascinating to me about that scene is this window into what the character of the church should be.
Yeah.
That's the underlying theme of why Ludvig the Bavarian is in northern Italy fighting a war in the first place, right? So that was an opportunity, again, to show people a real window onto what is at stake for medieval people. And in some ways, again, it ends up feeling like window dressing for this other part of the story, which is the more superficial aspects.
Meanwhile, Salvatore sets up his fucking rape trap again and succeeds this time, so that's cool.
Just try the same thing over and over. Apparently it'll work if there's a man writing the script or something.
Meanwhile, Adzo makes his sex confession to William, who's real chill about it.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually pretty cool.
There is this whole emphasis in the next episode about this whole captivity and attempted rape sequence, with Salvatore and a girl. So annoying that she doesn't have a name.
Good God.
Girl. It's a lot of the focus of this particular episode. I really just could have lived without it. It's not necessary. It's just so gratuitous to have this woman placed in this position of being threatened with rape.
Yes.
Essentially just to fill time.
Just to fill an episode.
The gratuity of the rape is bad enough, but then made even worse by the fact that they're kind of making this decision to present this disabled character as being a rapist, I think is like really problematic as well.
That's right. And in the book, it's a much sadder story because in the book, the girl is from the village below the monastery, which it's implied to exist in this movie because we see the poor peasants showing up with their stuff to get their coins a few times.
Right.
But we don't know where they are. But in the book, the girl comes from that village, and the implication, at least, is that she has agreed to have sex with Salvatore for some kind of gristly, like an ox heart or something like that, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? Because she's starving, because her family's starving because of these wars that are happening in northern Italy at the early 14th century. In that sense, like you can understand the mechanism where this woman is coerced and, just to survive. Whereas in the movie, you're right, it's just this gratuitous violence.
We need to emphasize women are there to be victimized, essentially.
Right.
She has no character. Her only function, essentially, is to be a sexual object, and she's just kind of sometimes consenting and sometimes not, essentially, as well.
Yeah.
Like, that's all she does, is have people desire her.
She's also quite a skilled bird whistler.
Right. It's the only thing we know about her. It's like she can make bird noises.
I mean, she could put it on her resume, but, it won't have any name.
It's like we really wanted to hire her to make bird noises, but it was so hard. He is trying to make a love spell for her so that she'll be into him. He has to murder a cat for this. Doesn't actually rape her because he's like, no, you're gonna spit on the eggs and the cat guts or whatever, and then you'll love me and then we'll have sex is the plan there in theory.
Yeah.
Also R.A.P. cat.
I mean, at least we didn't have to see that scene. Just the eyes, right?
We saw the eyes, and we saw before that he had this cat in a sack, so I'm not sure we actually saw the cat, but we heard the yowling and saw the writhing of the cat in the sack.
Yeah, I could imagine a grimmer version of that scene where it's like, here, kitty.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But, at least we didn't need to watch him kill the cat. Meanwhile, there's also other things going on. Gui is kind of warning Malachi that his alliance only goes so far, and that he's heard a lot of rumors about Berengar and Malachi's thing going on. But he nevertheless is kind of going forward with the debate. Anna shows up to look for Remigio and trying to murder Gui because why not, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
The debate parts I think are good, and William's very good at debating, and he has this kind of self-effacing I'm just going to make a couple of minor points. This isn't really, doctrine. I'm just, just reflecting. This is just off the cuff. And then makes very well thought out, convincing, clear arguments.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good, and it was actually relatively true to the spirit of the book, which is fairly, I think, accurate in terms of how it portrays the ideas that were floating around the imperial circle.
Yeah, and very much does kind of delve into, these central issues about the ways in which the Franciscan emphasis on poverty is something that the church ultimately fears in a lot of serious ways as being ultimately undermining their power, because the church is not poor. It was not in the Middle Ages and remains not so now.
Yeah, and the implications of the idea of poverty, they really were problematic for the church. I mean, how to deal, the idea of spiritual poverty, it doesn't have a whole lot of valence for the actual poor.
And, and when you are saying in my heart, I am poor, and then you are having some really fancy food on jeweled plates, it doesn't seem so much to the people that are actually starving that you're that poor in your heart.
I lost it in my heart.
Right. Severinus is murdered. I was sad.
I know.
Remigio is there and gets arrested and accused of both murder and heresy. William and Adzo then kick out everyone except for Benno and start to investigate. And Malachi is very grumpy about this. The monks are all just standing right outside, banging on the door. They're very annoyed about having been kicked out.
Right.
Adzo in the middle of this takes off and realizes somehow that Salvatore must have kidnapped girl.
Isn't it because there's something about the cat or
something having to do with the cat, and I think it comes up because he also realizes that they're looking for Salvatore in connection with Remigio having been arrested.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, he runs off to try and save her, but then instead gets shoved down a river.
Yeah,
because that history as an imperial soldier is not serving him too well, apparently.
That's a great way to escape getting captured by soldiers, you know.
Right, exactly. It's like he doesn't get to save her, but ultimately, like, he's much better off for himself having gotten very securely out of that little hut,
Right.
because then he is not also arrested when the papal soldiers come and arrest Salvatore and the girl.
Exactly.
And arrest her for witchcraft, because of course they do.
Well, what else should you do in the 14th century?
I'll reflect on this later.
Good.
I feel so bad for the abbot at the top of the next episode. Like, he's just like freaking the fuck out. I was not trained for this.
Right. He's like, I just wanted to fondle my gems and worship my little statue.
It's like, why? It's like, this is not what I thought I was getting into.
Right.
I feel so bad for him. Salvatore, meanwhile, since he just tried to rape somebody, I don't want to feel too bad for him, but also they put hot coals on his balls, so like, gotta feel a little bad for him.
That's some pretty instantaneous karma. I mean, you know?
Yep. There's also this one monk who's just like totally complaining, like, those are my irons, and they took them and they're using them, and that's not what they're for.
It's gonna have Salvatore's ball skin on him from now on.
And like Remigio's feet, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That too.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, do you realize how bad that guy's feet smell? He's a Franciscan.
Yeah. There's a lot of gratuitous torture scenes.
Yeah.
The stuff with Salvatore is particularly unpleasant because like it really has this creepy, kind of torturer Stockholm syndrome bond thing that happens very quickly of like Bernard Gui setting himself up as like he's both the torturer but also the person who is then his savior and that he can stop the torture.
I think that's fairly accurate though.
It's fairly accurate, especially when you take into account the fact that like clearly Salvatore is being presented as being to some extent disabled. Like he would in some sense like be potentially even easier to manipulate in this way.
Right.
Gui is also, there's this like whole thing that then doesn't actually go anywhere where he's like very stoked to hear that that Adzo is sleeping with the girl who's been accused of witchcraft and that therefore he could like use this to get to William.
Right.
And this is like a plot point that you think will go somewhere and it does not.
Yeah.
Which I'm fine with, but like why include it at all if it's not going to go anywhere? The trial is also deeply unpleasant in this way where we really see, Salvatore and how he's been manipulated into betraying Remigio, who we've seen him as being like very deeply devoted to for so long. And it's also just kind of an icky scene. The trial of Remigio is then kind of getting into partially the murder, but really they're mostly concerned about the heresy.
Right.
Malachi gives up these letters that Remigio had entrusted to him ages ago, which are actually letters from Dulcino, and which also reveal that Dulcino has a daughter.
Yeah.
Anna, she's relevant again.
Dun, dun,
and she's meanwhile just like wandering around the abbey, like just chilling, basically.
Right.
In one of the like very half-hearted attempts to get William involved or kind of implicated, they kind of bring up this like, you were talking to Severinus about like some book. What's the book? And then he says that it was a treatise on canine hydrophobia.
Yeah.
Which I really like to think is a Dominican joke.
Seems like a good one.
For listeners not familiar with the Latin, Bernard Gui is a Dominican friar, and Dominicanes in Latin is what they would have been called their order, but it would also, if you separate it out in the middle, would be Dominicanes, the hounds of the Lord.
Right.
Which is like a not 100% flattering always nickname that they get.
Yeah.
I like to think that it being a treatise specifically on canine hydrophobia is like a nasty comment about the Dominicans somehow, but
foaming at the mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Remigio also, I kind of love him in this scene. And that he goes from denial about being a heresy to then he like weirdly like starts in on the like weird evasive heretical comments that are like the kinds of where he's like, whatever you say is true if it is in fact the truth.
Yes.
Bernard Gui, this is like his thing, and he's like, so obviously he's like, yeah, no, this is like a thing that heretics do.
But what's interesting to me there, because this language, some of this language was lifted directly from Bernard Gui's manual that he wrote
Right.
in history. Lord, I will believe what you tell me to be true. Right. If you tell me what is true, rather. Right. And so the sympathetic reading of that is, why don't you tell me what you want me to say?
Right. That it's people who are being tortured and they're like, please just tell me what I need to say to make it stop.
I don't really know what the real nature of Christ is. You tell me, right?
It's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care much about the nature of Christ. I just want to not starve.
And yeah, but the scary part of that, of course, is the way Guy reads it, both historically, the real Guy, but also in the show, is that that actually means if you tell me what I want you to tell me, then I will then I will believe you.
Yeah. Yeah, although it's an interesting scene because Remigio does actually seem like he's doing it almost deliberately at this point, because I think he
Playing
sort
the
of
script.
realizes that he's fucked, and so now he just wants to like fuck with Gui.
Right.
Which like props, and because then he just like goes into, so he like informs on the abbot as having been like involved in the whole like some whole thing, and like knowing that he was a heretic, and the abbot just like takes off, and then just goes straight into like trying to summon Lucifer and calling upon the names of demons.
Right, and I think it's like, well, I think he was willing to accede to being a Dulcinian and having been with Fra Ticino, but then once Bernard Guy was like, well, how did you kill everyone in the Abbey? Which Remigio actually hadn't killed anybody in the Abbey.
Right, yeah.
But so then Bernard Guy was going to torture him again.
Yeah.
So then he's like, well, fuck it. I killed this guy because he was pretty. That guy looked at me funny. Like, remember, this guy was fat while I was poor or something. Like, he made up all this crap just to be like, get me out of the picture quick.
Right, yeah. And of course, yeah, it's obviously like avoiding torture, but also it's just like, I don't know, it's very theatrical. Like, I'm like he just really goes for it. And I'm like, you know what? Good for you, Remigio. Go out with a bang.
He definitely was very good.
We then learned that Benno, in fact, had found the book that they were looking for in Severinus's Herbaria. It was a book that was a number of treatises bound together. And there was this whole thing where like Adzo was, this is a weird looking book. And then William's like, you fucking idiot. Like, that's Arabic. We're looking for a Greek book.
Right.
And then like, at some point they're like, books can be bound together. Damn it.
Duh, it's the Middle Ages. Oh, yeah.
I forgot they did that, like, all the time. We learned that Benno found it and then gave it to Malachi in exchange for a position as his assistant. And Malachi falls over dead, calling out, it has the power of 1,000 scorpions.
Right, just like the apocalypse, son. No.
Just like the apocalypse. Anna, meanwhile, is like just chilling in the dungeon.
She's just lurking, right?
Yeah, there's this additional plot line which like doesn't really matter, where Remigio is like, I betrayed your father to save your mother because I was in love with her. Okay, that's fine. Sure, okay.
And then there's pointless rescue attempt.
Right.
It's like we end exactly where we started after like a 10-minute sequence.
Again, it's like this action that we're interpolating in, but it's ultimately completely pointless. And I mean, the irritating thing with the character of Anna is that she ultimately has no bearing on the story whatsoever, which makes sense because she's not in the original story and nothing that much changes. So we've, I guess, just decided that like that was it for the debate and we're not going to bother finishing it because Gui is all like, yeah, all I have to do is burn the witch and then I can just take off.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, my job is done here.
In the dungeons, we get a lot of contrast between like Salvatore cheerily eating some bugs and then Remigio like kind of trying to kill himself but then giving up in the middle.
Yeah.
Gui also is like very insistent that like he's like, I've won, I've destroyed the Franciscans, and it's like, did you do anything though?
I know. I didn't think it was really quite as conclusive as he suggested.
No, I mean the debate felt very inconclusive and unfinished.
Yes.
And then I mean this episode feels very rushed in some ways.
I mean, essentially the head of the Franciscans says, well, I'll go to Avignon and meet with the Pope because I want him to know I want there to be a unified church and I'm sure we can come to some sort of understanding, right? Which is what historically happened. This guy, Michael Lips, is saying I went to Avignon.
Right.
And shortly thereafter, I had to get the hell out of there, but
Right, and then he's like, no, I'm not going to stay in Avignon.
He tried.
Adzo and William are trying to save Girl from the dungeon.
Yeah.
William tries to blackmail Gui by like reminding him, and this is what we talked about before, that he actually like appropriated the power of the secular arm and instead and himself set fire to the pyre that at which Dulcino and Margarita were executed.
That's definitely a sin, bud.
It's definitely a sin. But again, this goes nowhere. It's so weird.
Blackmail.
It's like William, you're not good at blackmailing.
No, he was pretty bad at it, it turns out.
Like he has this whole speech, and at first I'm like, that's cool. Like he's gonna like blackmail him successfully, and then like that's how she's gonna escape. Like that's nice. I like that. And then like Gui just goes in and chats with her in Occitan, creepily smells her hair, and then decides, yeah, she's a witch.
Yeah, it's like she smells just like the last woman I burned for no reason.
Exactly.
She smells like witchcraft and fear.
William and Adso then go to see the abbot, who is just absolutely lost it at this point, and like starts by just like musing about gem lore for like 10 goddamn minutes.
I know.
Then tries to like force Adso into like kiss his ring and take a vow of silence, and then like fires William, and then is like, it's Vespers, off you go.
I really think that gem lore is underrated, and we could have used a little Lord of the Rings fanfare music in that scene or something. I don't know.
The abbot's unhinged disquisition about gem lore was actually kind of fun, and like I wish we'd like gotten like more about the Marian devotion element,
right?
And like how that fit in for him.
He's like, I read this book by Albert the Great once, dude, and now that I'm totally like freaked out,
right?
Let me tell you this thing I remember: the kiss my ring.
But they can't really expand that disquisition because they've put all of the action that was in the original book and then some into this episode, and it's already like feels very crowded.
Yeah.
William's still like real grumpy about the fact that he hasn't figured out yet how to enter the inner sanctum of the library, and then like thanks to this like Chancellor Mark finally has an epiphany and like figures it out.
Right.
And then he also like feels dumb because he's like, how did I not like figure out this Latin? They go to the library. They finally enter the Finis Africae, the kind of inner sanctum, and they find Jorge. He's the murderer. Surprise.
Yeah.
This reveal, I feel like, is like not done well.
There was no sense of excitement or suspense. It's just sort of like, yep, here I am.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense, I guess. You got the book.
Like, let's run through this. We've got 5 minutes of runtime, Chief.
Exactly. Like, it just feels very much so like, fuck, we haven't even said who the murderer is.
Yeah.
And we have to like deal with girl.
True.
The abbot, meanwhile, has entered through one of these secret entrances and has now been like trapped in a teeny tiny enclosed space where he then is like suffocated to death. So Jorge is keeping going with those murders. He has now murdered the abbot.
Jorge is rolling deep.
He's murdered like 8 people or whatever.
Yeah.
I also, the poor abbot, he's in there and he's like, you have to let me out. I order you. I'm the abbot. And it's like, buddy, it's not going to work, my friend.
I know. It's like, dude, that is such a sad effort.
I feel bad for him. He just got it over his head.
Yeah, definitely.
So then there's this awkward thing where they're like, no, the apocalypse stuff was like just a red herring. And like Malachi just like murdered people because he was gay, basically. Which, like, I don't think is quite how they settled on it in the book.
No, that was not how they did it in the book at all. Essentially in the book, what it turns out to be is that, this whole debate over whether Christ laughed was like really, really, really central to people working in the library. And Jorge had brought back the lost book of Aristotle's second book of Poetics, which was in history, it's never been discovered if it existed, right? Or whatever. But and the conceit of the story is that Jorge found the only copy known in Christendom, and it's hidden in the bowels of this library. And Jorge is terrified that if anyone discovers it, then it will undermine the seriousness of Christ's message, because, as John Chrysostom said, Christ never laughed, right?
Right. So this is going back to, again, that's why the debate about whether Christ laughed is central,
exactly,
in fact, to the story.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like, this is Jorge's opinion about this is that, no, Christ never laughed and this matters, is why he's, like, murdered 7 people.
Right. If I'm not mistaken, the only person that Malachi kills in the book is Severinus, right? The herbalist.
Yeah, in order to try and get the book back.
Exactly.
So all the people that were poisoned, we find out, are poisoned by the book itself, essentially, that the poison has been rubbed onto the pages of the book, and because the pages are very thin and kind of stick to each other, you kind of have to like turn the pages by licking your finger and then touching a page and then licking your finger and turning the next page and so on. And so because of this, you then, if you're reading the book, you ingest the poison.
Right. So
essentially it's a kind of foolproof way basically to kill anyone who actually reads this dangerous book.
Exactly, except for that William has gloves on.
Right, except for William, who has gloves on. And I do also find it entertaining that then this kind of goes back to that poor Benno, he like wants to like, be assistant and like have all this stuff in the library, but he also has so little intellectual curiosity that he doesn't even like try to read the book.
Right.
I guess maybe it's just because he doesn't know Greek. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so.
He's like, fuck it. I don't know. I don't read Greek. I'm just not going to worry about this. I'll find some other books.
Right. So what's to me fascinating in the book in this scene is that we learn that essentially all of William's theories were complete nonsense, essentially. The theories about the apocalypse and all of his theories turn out to have been constellations of signs and symbols that William had created rationally, but that didn't reflect reality. And essentially, William realizes that he entered the Finis Africae, the central, sanctum of the library, because he really wanted to get in there, and it didn't necessarily have anything to do with the crime. He created the circumstances to get in there, and he happened to solve the crime completely by accident.
Right. And then I think the way in which he's trying to solve the crime then also kind of puts Jorge into the position where he then does end up ultimately meeting William and Adzo in the library in this particular fashion.
And it's funny because in the book, I think Jorge's like, well, I've been waiting for you for quite some time.
Right. I thought you were going to figure this out way sooner, buddy.
It's like, dude, what's wrong with you?
Yeah. Jorge then consumes the pages of the book, both destroying the book and killing himself, but also there is a Adzo's lantern falls and starts a fire, which is never good in a library.
No.
Meanwhile, Bernard Gui is in the middle of burning the Occitan girl.
Right.
Anna manages to rescue her and then just immediately gets killed. So we do not pass the ifft Decker test, everyone.
Right.
There was one named woman and she does not, or there were two, I guess also her mother. They did not make it.
Right, yes.
Remigio basically lets himself burn to death after trying to save some books. Poor Alenardo, our poor monk who's musing about the apocalypse. This poor man just gets gratuitously fucking trampled by a horse while yelling about the apocalypse more.
Right? I mean, he was crazy, but he was kind of a cute little old man. He's like, give me some chickpeas.
I know, it's he seemed nice. And I think he's on the right side, ultimately. And that the other kind of complicated part of it that they kind of half-heartedly explain in the show and do a better job of explaining in the book is that it's essentially, there are two different factions, basically. It's the, I guess, mostly kind of, German/Spanish faction that wants to keep the library closed off and have very kind of serious restrictions about who can enter the library and who can read what. And the Italians want there to be more of a kind of opening up of the library and for everyone to be able to access it freely.
Right, but they also, but the Italians also just don't want a non-Italian to be in charge.
That too, yeah.
There's also just the clear implication that no foreigner will do.
Right, yeah, that's very much true.
Yeah.
Which,
hey.
Based on the example of Malachi, I don't blame them for being nope, we're just done with these Germans.
If you're a 14th century Italian, most of the Germans you meet are probably show up with pointy sticks and swords and things, and I can see how they might not make a great impression.
Right, you're not getting a good idea of Germans. The library's mostly burned. They rescue 12 books.
Right.
Half the monks are dead, I guess. Bernard Gui's just fuck it, I'm leaving. Occitan girl, I don't know, runs off into the woods or whatever. I guess she's fine.
Right.
And Adzo goes off, kind of starts off with William, but then eventually, I guess, makes his way back to his abbey in Germany of Melk and muses that she was the love of my life and I never knew her name. And this is from the book, but I'm still Adzo, just go fuck yourself. Come on. She's not the goddamn love of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember that from the book. Maybe it was in there, though. It wasn't as strongly, at least it wasn't as annoying.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's just something about how her whole character was dealt with that makes it even more annoying.
Because in the book, she's burned.
Maybe it was in the movie, not the book.
They do that in the movie for sure. But in the book, remember, he has the whole long disquisition about searching for the fragments for years. And then he ends with the Latin poem about the rose. It's almost once he gets over the girl, he's like, well,
books are better than women,
right? I mean, that's kind of the implication throughout the book,
right? Or at least, books are better than romantic relationships.
Now that I'm old, I realize what a fool I was to be tempted by the flesh.
Yes, William has an interesting line about there being different types of lust, and lust for knowledge and books being one of the types of lust. And Bernard Gui is lust for his own perverted sense of justice or something like that.
Right.
I was just so annoyed by that line by this point.
It was.
But I'm you could have asked her name so many times. You spent so much time with her.
The least creative guy in the world.
The least interest in his romantic and sexual partner.
Right? You can't even bother to figure out how to communicate enough to figure out what she calls herself.
It is not that hard. You point at yourself and then you say Adzo and then you point at her and you say and you're
Me Tarzan,
Right, exactly. That's the basic thing. That's the I feel that's the easiest way thing to be able to communicate to a speaker of a foreign language.
I mean, I guess that's what they say about not being very street smart,
Right. Ugh. move on to our next section, the vera et falso, where we talk about what they get right and what they get wrong.
Excellent.
The very short version of what will be the thesis of this section is that there is a decent amount that is right here, and all of it comes from Umberto Eco, and everything that they added is terrible, and I hate it.
Yeah. All of the extra material, you end up wondering why.
So some visuals, they show an astrolabe and, the kind of scientific instrument used to make astronomical measurements, which looks about correct and is described more or less accurately.
Right.
They refer to the medical school at Padua, which is real.
Yeah,
That's something. The abbot hanging the jewels on the Virgin Mary actually seems like a kind of plausible thing.
I definitely thought so, yeah.
This kind of dressing up of statues in these kind of ritualistic ways. We definitely know that they dressed up statues.
Yes.
There was a big thing in the Guinages that they would have these Christ child dolls, essentially, that they would dress up.
Yeah, in Santa Fe, this is an early modern example, but their statue of La Conquistadora, they still dress her up to this day, and they have outfits, and so they think that there is a plausible tradition there.
Mostly, I think they did okay with talking about the Dulcinian heresy. They kind of sensed that it was sort of inspired by, or at least a little too close to the Franciscans' kind of idea of radical poverty and the poverty of the church. That it is this kind of movement that basically, at least according to reports, kind of devolved into murder and plunder, ultimately with Dulcino and his band. That he really did also have a woman who was his lover, but also kind of his co-preacher, it seems, who is quite negatively depicted in these sources that we have about her,
indeed.
Which are, of course, written by inquisitors.
Well, Bernard Guy is one of the
by
primary
Bernard
sources.
Guy, yes.
So,
yeah.
Surprise, listeners.
Yeah. Interestingly, so we have a lot of documentation about a number of his followers being burned at the stake.
Right.
But we actually don't have explicitly anything contemporary that overtly refers to Dulcino having successfully been executed.
Right.
The other thing is, what the fuck is this scene where they're crucifying heretics?
Yeah, fair question.
Why would a Christian crucify heretics as a punishment that reminds everyone of Jesus?
Oh, these are the thieves, not, no. No, yeah, really, that was a huge miss for me as well. I was like, come on, guys.
Yeah, and I've seen that sort of thing a couple of times, and it always drives me nuts. They don't use crucifixion as a punishment for heresy.
Right.
For very good reasons.
Right. Yeah. It's think of the symbols here, guys. Come on.
The kind of kernel of this issues between the Franciscans and the church at this point, and the kind of suspicion of the Franciscans as being heretical, and at the same time the concern that essentially what they want to define as heresy increasingly is being critical of the church and of the lack of poverty of the church.
Right.
And that being inherently a problem.
Yeah, I thought they handled that fairly well. I mean, it's it's a topic that is fairly complex and has a long history even by that point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously they had to kind of just get it in there in a way that was digestible for any lay audience member. And I thought they did that pretty successfully.
I wish they'd done just a little bit more. I wish that part of the story had been just a little bit richer.
That's my favorite part of the story too. I mean, honestly, the murder mystery is almost, I know that's the main part of the book, but it's that's neither here nor there.
And the thing that I love about the book is that I think the book is actually kind of about both.
Right, exactly.
They're interested in the murder mystery, and then they add all these other action plots. And I don't think ultimately the makers of this show were that interested in this Franciscan story, which, I think is fascinating and would love to have more of here. But what they do have, I think, is overall done well. They just could have had a bit more.
Agreed.
One little thing I really enjoyed that they kind of stuck in there. I think in general, the kind of language that people use when talking about, various kind of religious debates is overall well done.
Yeah.
And just one kind of particular example is that I'm always really enjoy the use of the metaphor from the Song of Songs about the foxes and the vines.
Yes, indeed.
As kind of metaphor for heresy and the kind of heretical foxes destroying the vines of the true church.
Me too. I have a lecture on heresy that's quoted title is "The Little Foxes on the Vines" or whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's an evocative image, and they did do a good job with that.
Yeah, definitely. In my Women in the Bible class, when we talked about the Song of Songs, it was definitely very fun to be so this is a poem that you read, and this is clearly a poem about sex, and then it's and now you get to read what Bernard of Clairvaux has to say about this poem, and it's did you know it is about heresy?
Right.
But it is a very evocative metaphor in that sense, yeah.
Definitely.
Then there are some things that are, I guess I would say, they get a little bit right, but don't quite hit. I don't want to defend Bernard Gui. Like, I think he's terrible, but I hate these efforts to kind of make someone, I don't know, sadistic in this very, like, there's this very much, like, insistence that, like, if you're kind of killing somebody in this way, that, like, let's make them, like, sadistic and, like, sexually frustrated and, like, consumed by these weirdly personal hatreds, as opposed to, as I think I was saying before, that I think what makes him so terrifying is that I think he comes off in his Inquisitor's Manual as so clinical about everything.
Yes, and I think that this idea that we have that people who do things that we consider to be wrong have to then have like these obvious personality defects.
Right.
It's a flawed model, and we see over and over again that that's just simply not the case, right? I mean, I think one of the actually most compelling things about a person like Bernard Guy is how reasonable his thought world, his kind of intellectual world was within his presumptions. You know, it was like an internally coherent system of thought. And that's what made that kind of thinking so dangerous. It's like the a priori assumptions create this necessity to exterminate difference, essentially, which is the problem with purity test, essentially, right? You know?
Right. And in addition, I mean, I think there is this insistence that violence has to be irrational.
Right.
I think what's terrifying about violence, both in terms, you know, inquisitorial violence in the Middle Ages, you know, the Nazi concentration camps, for example. I mean, I think there is much to be said for thinking about the ways in which violence is rational and systematic and organized.
That's right.
If we acknowledge the ways in which that is true, both in the past and today, we actually will have a better sense of how systemic violence works to oppress people.
Yeah.
And so it would be nice to acknowledge that and not pretend that violence is random and irrational always.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about the book is that you have this contrast between Bernard Guy, who's like this very dangerous figure, and he brings violence with him by implication in the story, at least, and the Dulcinians, right, who are definitely violent. And, you know, they're on opposite sides. And in fact, the Dulcinians are, in some sense, taking the idea of poverty to its logical extreme.
Killing of rich people and taking their stuff.
You know, it's like, well, these people are not going to get up off of it.
Right.
You know, and the gospel, you know, like the gospels tell us, you know, so they have like, I mean, it's twisted.
Yeah.
If you're not operating within that logical system, right? And I think that's Bernard Guy's way of thinking seems twisted from the outside, but from within it actually has its own kind of logic. It just turns out that thankfully we now understand how limiting and dangerous logic can be.
Yes. So that's something that I wish they'd done that rather differently. The other thing that is, again, something that, you know, it's not inaccurate per se, but that I wish they would just stop, is that this is very much an example, which, as I said, which the book isn't, of insisting on this kind of trope of the Middle Ages as everything's very violent.
Right.
And all of the violence that we see in this is very gratuitous. The battle scene doesn't actually really matter to anything else that we see. The torture, honestly, in the Winnie doesn't even really matter. We don't need to see that for the most part. The rape is gratuitous. It you know, is ultimately not even relevant to the plot in a kind of meaningful way. It's like a way to fill an episode. And it's very much kind of, I see it as being this need to present the pre-modern as violent in order to pretend that the modern is less violent.
The Pinker approach.
Exactly. And that's how Pinker, to some extent, proves his argument, is by exaggerating the violence of the past and de-emphasizing the violence of the present.
Ignoring whole categories of modern violence.
Well, I mean ignoring whole categories of violence in the present, and in the past, like relying on basically like a coffee table book about the Inquisition as his main source. It's a terrible book. Nobody read it.
Right.
I think that is unfortunately, very pervasive belief that makes modern people feel better about themselves.
Yes.
And that medieval media is used to prove that point, for modern people to prove that point to ourselves. And I wish we would stop. And I like that the book doesn't, and the movie for that part, they don't do that. I mean, there are murders, but the murders all have a purpose.
Right.
It's not gratuitous violence when you like find corpses, some of which is, unpleasant, but it doesn't feel the same way.
That's right. Yeah.
Then there's a couple of things that they obviously got wrong, like really wrong. Some of them are nitpicky because I like to complain about art history. The
Definitely.
paintings look so 15th century to me.
Yes, I agree.
I think some of them might legit be like Fra Angelico copies.
Okay.
That could be, 15th century artist. Yeah, like a lot of the art is like too late, and I was looking at that. Another like fun fact that I learned recently, actually, because Ray Clemens, curator at the Beinecke at Yale, was actually here at Indiana to give a talk the other week, and just happened to mention offhand the fact that illuminators only are working with one color at any given time, because otherwise you're like mixing up all of these dyes and they dry up too fast.
Ah, okay.
Which totally makes sense. I just never thought about it before.
Right.
But that you would go through and do the whole book in one color, and then you would go through and do a different, and like do the next color, and so on.
Wow, okay.
So since I've learned that fun fact recently, I'm now on the lookout for it and can say that this was not done correctly, that you clearly see the illuminators working with a palette that has multiple color dyes on it.
Right, okay.
Yeah. I also want to talk about Bernard Guy's weird little crosses.
Okay, yes. It's like self-hurting, kind of weird.
There were practices of self-mortification.
Scourging seems like it would have been more period appropriate, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like people would scourge themselves.
Hair shirts even. Ooh.
Cutting teeny little crosses into your skin. I don't know where they got that from, and it's just a bizarre choice. And I wish they'd just like gone for some like nice standard scourging if they're going to emphasize Bernard Guy as practicing self-mortification. Another thing that I have talked about so many times is please stop placing the early modern witch craze in the Middle Ages. Just everyone, please stop.
That would be just a bridge too far for the modern imagination. So come on.
Yeah, and I've said this many times. The real like interest in witchcraft and anxiety about witchcraft begins in the 15th century and really kind of reaches its peak in the 16th and 17th. It's really an early modern phenomenon. It's not a medieval phenomenon, and to the extent that it is, it's later medieval than this. Also, witches don't get burned, witches get hanged.
Right.
So who does get burned are heretics.
Yeah.
And in the book, I believe she's accused of heresy.
Yes.
So it makes sense.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder what the non-historian or enthusiast of history, how they conceive of like the early modern period, because it seems like a very just from a lay perspective, they probably are like, everything before 1776 is roughly the Middle Ages, right? I mean, I don't know. I just wonder sometimes how people periodize.
Right.
Like, I guess the Renaissance slides in there somewhere, Shakespeare.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do think that it is that like the Renaissance is like marketing campaign of like we're like better than the dumb last 1,000 years.
Well, it's like a bunch of Italian misogynists, right? Basically,
exactly,
in the beginning.
Yeah.
In the beginning, that's my take on it anyway. Like, look how perfect the male form is. Women suck. That's like the new narrative of the Renaissance. Joining old narratives about how women suck, of course, but.
Right. And then, that also like in terms of literature that they're like this, like, oh, we're going to like go back to like the Greco-Roman antiquity, and like we're going to pretend that we've discovered all these books that people have been reading for like 200 years, and that's only in the West. It's been like 1,000 years in the East. And
yeah, gee.
And then you have things like Stephen Greenblatt's book on the like discovery of Lucretius's De Natura.
Right.
He makes the claim that like this discovery like ended religious intolerance during the Renaissance. And it's like, have you seen the Renaissance? It's arguably a period in which things certainly got worse for Jews. There's, the witch craze. And then there's the fact that most of the early modern period was marked by explicitly religious wars between Catholics and Protestants.
The idea that medieval people were completely unaware of the De Natura is complete nonsense. Also, I mean, but
that too.
Whatever. I suppose if you make a bold enough claim and you're a famous scholar, apparently you could, what award did he win for that book? Several. I don't know. Many awards. It was amazing.
I was so angry.
I was so impressed that people continue to just treat the Middle Ages as an interregnum.
Yep, I didn't read the actual book, but I read the like mini version of the book that he did as a New Yorker article, and if I had not been reading it on a Kindle, I would have thrown it across the room.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And then, of of course, all the way back to the beginning, there is the lovely line, Ludvig of Bavaria declared the separation between politics and religion.
Oh,
so in
yeah.
addition to the fact that no one did that in the Middle Ages, no one, specifically Ludvig of Bavaria, didn't. So that should lead into our next segment, Historia et Veritas, where we focus on a real historical figure or event or phenomenon. And you, as one of the world's leading experts on Ludvig of Bavaria, can talk about him and how he didn't do that.
Well, fantastic. Understanding that my enthusiasm for this subject is not matched by probably more than 2 other people on the planet. I will give you the short version of the short version. And so what I'll say then is that the conflict between Ludwig of Bavaria, who is at this point in time the king of the Romans is his title, and that essentially is the intermediary step on the way to being a chosen or crowned Holy Roman Emperor, right? So he's been elected as king of the Romans by the elector princes of the Holy Roman Empire. And essentially what happens is that John the 22nd is elected as Pope 2 years later. Well, they don't get along. What happens is that John the 22nd becomes Pope in Avignon because, of course, Italy is very turbulent in the 13th century, and it becomes impossible for the papacy to stay secure in Rome. All throughout the 13th century, they're going to Viterbo or traveling itinerantly around Italy or whatever. Finally, they go to Avignon.
Thanks to some active intervention on the part of the King of France.
Yeah, this is, and essentially John the 22nd, though, he becomes Pope and decides, well, I want to reclaim Italy for the papacy. And so he starts a series of wars. He actually revolutionizes papal finance to finance a series of devastating mercenary wars in northern Italy, trying to reconquer this place for the papacy. The people of northern Italy aren't very happy, and they see themselves, or at least it's convenient for themselves to see themselves as imperial subjects, right? So they appeal to King Ludwig for help. It turns out that Ludwig comes from a good imperial family, but they're not territorially rich, nor are they financially rich. So he doesn't have a lot of resources. So he can't be a beggar and chooser about if somebody wants to support him, he kind of needs to
we're buddies.
yeah, guys, we're going to work this out together. So he intervenes on behalf of these northern Italian lords who are resisting the Pope. And the Pope decides to excommunicate Ludwig for this.
As you do.
But essentially, he uses a legal maneuver. He says, I didn't approve your election, so you're not the king. So therefore, all the things that you're doing when you say you're the king are not lawful, right? And so the whole conflict actually ends up, at least in the sense of what is the crux of the conflict, it's really about legal jurisdiction. Is the Pope's Roman canon law going to apply in Germany, or is the electoral tradition of the empire going to prevail? That is to say that the elected princes choose the king, and then the king is at that point, in fact, the king. And so there's a longer medieval history that goes back and forth about that claim between Pope and emperor. And a longer conflict, actually, about who's kind of in charge of the Holy Roman Empire. But the actual proclamation that Ludwig makes is that papal law doesn't apply to the royal election in Germany, which is a very far cry from saying that politics and religion are actually separate. What he's actually just saying is that the law of the church doesn't apply to the specific instance of the election by tradition. But it turns out that 3 of the electors are themselves archbishops, the Archbishop of Trier, Mainz, and Cologne. I mean, these are all churchmen who are, elected by the church, approved by the Pope. They're 3 of the 4 electors. There's no question here that there's religion involved, and nobody's trying to push religion out at all.
No.
It's more about how do we define and experience religion on a day-to-day basis? What power can the Pope have in the politics of the kingdom, its highest levels?
Right, that exactly. How does the relationship, between the church and the kind of state, how the kingdom, how does that intersect?
Right, and this is actually a manifestation of the same issue that Christendom has been facing writ large for the past, I suppose, roughly 150 years, which is what is the role of the church in the individual Christian's life? And there's an increasing intervention of the church in the form of a requirement of confession, of the mendicant orders like the Franciscans and Dominicans preaching and telling people what the Bible actually does say, so that people know what they're supposed to think, right? This idea about, you should actually have certain rituals and rites that guide your life in a Christian way.
And coming in part as a kind of response to the kind of rise or perceived rise of heresy, that
Yeah.
that's the problem, is that they don't know what they're supposed to believe, and there's no meaningful oversight that the church has over the vast majority of the faithful.
Exactly. So it is. So there's this tension between the church, which has this very rational, educational, lawyerly aspect to it, like with Roman, with the apparatuses of Roman and canon law operating together into this like rational system through which they want essentially Christendom to operate. And in some sense, they're actually successful in disseminating the ideas of Roman canon law such that they underpin much of our modern legal system still today. But they aren't successful in preventing the idea that not every aspect of life should be governed by the Pope, right? Because there's this sense that the the papacy has to guide every aspect of Christian life to lead to salvation, right? Yeah. It's kind of the monarchical model of rulership in a sense.
Right.
Nothing to do with separating politics and religion. And it's really about who gets to define what politics and what religion actually constitute.
Right, which is a much more interesting story than he just separated politics and religion. We've got separation of church and state now. We're good.
Yeah, I mean, I find it very fascinating, and a lot of this conflict from the imperial side actually is experienced as an affront to Ludwig's honor, as opposed to really being, strictly speaking, just simply a legal matter, right? So reputation is crucial in this time period. So a lot of how the imperial side tries to sell this to its own supporters is that Ludwig's honor has been affronted, the honor of the empire is being affronted by its enemy. And so there's the legal aspect, but there's also just this aspect about kind of this machismo about are we going to let this guy just this French guy do this to us?
Yeah, thank you. And everyone can look out for the book eventually.
Yeah, eventually there will be a book on this topic. Forthcoming 2020 something, I hope.
Yep. For our next section, Fabula Nostra, we talk about essentially alternative versions of this that we might want to come up with. Often we do casting. I had a week and did not come up with casting, I'm going to be honest.
Oh, man. Casting. I don't know.
So I'm actually just going to be very brief on my front and just say that we medievalists are like the 12 people in the world who really want a series that actually is really, I think, delving into this conflict between the Franciscans and the church in this period.
Yes, definitely.
I would love to have a show that's actually centered on that. And I think that could be really fascinating to actually really kind of delve into the theological implications of this debate.
Yes, I truly agree.
And because I do believe in how shows should have female characters who sort of matter, I think having kind of nuns who are of the poor clares actually would be an interesting kind of tack in terms of how they are both kind of engaged in this debate, but also kind of sidelined from it.
Yeah.
I think could be an interesting element. And also, honestly, at this point, I just think it would be great to have some women that aren't a love interest for anybody, because everybody's celibate and they can just stay that way.
Right. You mean all medieval women didn't live or nuns didn't live in the little hours?
I mean, some did, but the clares are probably not the direction they would have taken if they were going to go that way. If that's what they were looking for. I
mean, I guess my wish list is that the two stories could just be mashed together,
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, then these nuns have shown up here and they're ready to participate in this debate as well.
Right. And I do actually think that Alison Brie, who's in the Little Hours, I think she could do a good job as a sincere nun too.
Yeah, she was pretty good. I think she was good in that. Yeah. My wish list would be more female characters, perhaps. I mean, yeah, certainly less extraneous action. And it would actually be interesting. I wonder what an actual scholar of medieval warfare would what they would film a battle looking like. I bet it would be a much more orderly affair with far less death and more running away. I'm just guessing, but
right, yeah. I mean, I guess they actually when things do get into a pitched battle, I think they probably are somewhat chaotic ultimately.
Crazy was probably pretty bad, crazy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I do actually kind of like the touch to some extent that he is trying to say the last rites over somebody, but it seems like then a weird touch. His father's like, "Come on, he's dead already. Leave him alone."
Right.
Our final main section, enumeratio, is where we rate this on a scale of 1 to 5 based on essentially whatever criteria you decide that you would like to base this on. We can each have our own ratings. What would you give this on a scale of 1 to 5?
I have a cheater scale because it's
Okay.
I want to like give it a 5 to start with because
Yeah.
it tries so hard and it does so much well. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
John Turturro does a great job. But then I have to lower it a full like 3 notches immediately because basically,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's like, so you guys know that there are no women and that this is a problem. Like the one
Right.
female character has no name. So you introduce a female character, but she's totally gratuitous to the plot. And if you had not had her in there at all, actually nothing would have changed otherwise in the entire rest of the show, really. I mean, am I wrong? And so to me, that lowers it a lot, just it really does because I feel like
Yeah.
it's a distraction and it's almost an insult to us as viewers is that we can't handle a more like, I guess, sophisticated, that we just need some swords and stuff.
And then in addition, it's like adding insult to injury that then they also have to kill her.
Yes, and then she died. Like she literally, it's like she never existed. Oh,
Exactly. Yeah. Like she could have at least like helped nameless woman who they could have just given a name. It's fine. They could have helped her escape and gone off together, and then at least she would have mattered for something.
I
Like,
thought they would. I thought they were gonna go off together, And then when she
yeah,
died, it was like, oh man, come on.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I think my final rating, though, it goes back to a 3, just because. For those critiques, I actually think that compared to the movie, especially the way that they actually did try to handle some of the issues from the book that were tricky
Mm-hmm.
to handle, like the debate on poverty,
Yeah.
they did better than the movie in most of those respects. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have to give a little respect to the team for at least trying.
Yeah. I think I'm going to knock it down to a 2. I mean, in part because I would say, like, I find it so frustrating that they had so much that was good to work with in the form of the book and so much space to really do that material justice.
Oh, that's true.
And there's areas in which they did well, but then there's so many areas in which instead their response was to introduce these plot lines that are emphasizing gratuitous violence and that are not adding anything to the plot. And there's the numerous issues with the female characters. I really just cannot get over this like very gratuitous rape plot line, and in particular how then this also kind of takes this like person with a disability and villainizes him in this very disturbing way. I think I'm going to go with a 2, and I think to be honest it probably almost would have been a 1 except for how much I enjoyed a couple of the kind of moments here and there when they're actually kind of giving space to things like, that like Franciscan, like that debate over poverty, I think are just
Right.
like those are done so well, and that John Turturro does a great job. And actually I think James Cosmo as Jorge, I think that he kind of got sidelined a little bit more than he actually ideally would have been, but I think he did a great job too. So as I said, I really almost would have given it a 1 for not doing a good enough job of adapting its actually like fantastic source material.
Right.
And
That's
I mean,
fair.
basically like for having taken something that would have been a 5 and bringing the level down, I think that like, yeah, because of that, I almost would have given it a 1, but because of the few things that it does do so well, the acting, I'll up it to a 2. So, are there places where people could find you or you would want them to find you on the internet?
Well, I actually do need to create some sort of internet presence. I don't really maintain one per se. I do have an Instagram page, Kevinismus78.
Okay.
If anyone wants to look at pictures of things like bread and skies.
You have some flowers.
And flowers, that's right. And
Yeah.
mostly it's just the way that I find helps me to focus on, on beauty when I'm walking around.
And if you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app. And please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. I will read 5-star reviews in future episodes. So here's an example of a recent one from Emmy Can't Be Miko. So the heading is 2 of my favorite things, history and mostly bad movies. Okay, not every movie covered here is a bad movie, and some of the bad ones are firmly in the good-bad camp, but enough are that this show really hits the spot if you enjoy bad movie discussion podcasts. Add in enthusiastic and authoritative discussion of real medieval history, and you have a podcast that is equal parts fun and informative. Highly recommended. Thank you for that kind review from Emmy Can't Be Miko. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval and join our Facebook group. You can ask me any questions at media.evalpod@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifdecker. Thank you, Kevin, for joining me today.
Thanks, Sarah. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Bye.